Mr. Speaker, in the last few moments, probably the last few hours, we've had quite a bit of animation in this chamber responding to what was delivered by the Honorable Prime Minister, Minister for Finance, a few days ago. But, Mr. Speaker, no animation, no amount of noises, no amount of heckling will stop the might and the work of the United Workers' Party. Mr. Speaker, at this point, we have heard, analyzed, crystallized, and consumed the presentation made by the Minister for Finance on the theme, Building Resilience Today to Secure Our Future. For some among us, based on the location of their seats, after 1 hour and 45 minutes of consumption of the bountiful policy initiatives distilled and presented by the Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, they are intoxicated, inebriated, and confused as they struggle to find their blurred path to justify their position to the opposition to the presentation of the 2018-19 budget policy statement. Mr. Speaker, the essence and spirit of the policies are enunciated by the Prime Minister, Minister for Finance this year, reflects the maturity of a real, infuses confidence among the people, particularly to the business sector here in Saint Lucia. Mr. Speaker, on this premise, I am motivated to give support to the Appropriation Bill 2018-2019 as presented by the Minister for Finance on Tuesday evening. Mr. Speaker, the presentation by the Prime Minister must be placed into context to have an appreciation of the environment in which we are operating and the circumstances under which we were summoned to take control in June of 2016. Mr. Speaker, in June 2016, when the people of Saint Lucia mobilized and rallied around the United Workers' Party with one simple exhortation, "You pay!" It was their clarion battle call to state that enough was enough. Mr. Speaker, you still pay. It was that resounding victory at the poll, in which brazen men and women were rejected, probably not losing their deposit, but rather flattened thinly into oblivious realm, into nothingness. We know who they are. But, Mr. Speaker, it was that resounding victory, we'll have a drink after I finish. It was that resounding victory that presented this government with the inheritance of an economy that was sluggish, with negative economic growth, persistent high unemployment, high debt to GDP ratio, and an urgent need to contain inflation to imaginable levels. This was 2006-2011, but it is the context within this budget must be understood and studied. This, in a nutshell, Mr. Speaker, is what we inherited and for which we were called upon to fix, recalibrate, and re-energize to build a new Saint Lucia sufficiently resilient to secure our future. Mr. Speaker, permit me for a brief moment, as many may have pontificated on their version and interpretation of the state of our country's economy and social health, to reflect on the context within which the Minister for Finance presented the 2017-18 budget. Mr. Speaker, for the year 2017-2018, you may have recalled the Minister for Finance presenting his budget on the theme, Building a New Saint Lucia. In our quest to build that new Saint Lucia, the Minister for Finance mustered the courage to, one, reduce the value-added tax by 2.5%, or 16.66% reduction. Two, increase excise tax on fuel from $2.50 per gallon to $4 a gallon. In essence, dedicating a 1.50 fuel tax to refund, or rather to fund, the maintenance and reconstruction of roads. These were two among many other policy measures presented last financial year to finance our recurrent and capital expenditure program within the Ministry of Infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, members opposite referred to those measures as egregious, to say the least. As far as they are concerned, these measures were bound to cause this government to forego substantial amounts of revenue and causing the IMF to sharpen its proverbial teeth. And coming to think of it, they should have been outside this chamber this evening at this time, waiting to prescribe their well-known medicine of salary cuts, retrenchment, removal of all subsidies on basic commodities, new tax measures, elimination of investment incentives regime, salary and wage cuts, and other fiscal measures. Bold and courageous, Mr. Speaker, we faced those challenges and defied the odds and instituted measures in fulfillment of our campaign promises, promises made, promises fulfilled. But, Mr. Speaker, the success of those initiatives have brought material strength to the 2018-2019 budget, reflected on page 8 of the Minister for Finance budget address, confirming that we did better than expected with an estimated shortfall of only $27 million as opposed to the projected loss of revenue of $55 million. This is 49% better than anticipated. Mr. Speaker, in addition, the prophets and the acolytes of gloom and doom tried very hard to convince the people of Saint Lucia that we are very much like them and would grossly affect the pockets of the taxpayers of this country, particularly with the fuel tax. But, Mr. Speaker, I would hate to believe that we are like them, because we have earned a reputation of being a prudent, caring, and strategic government of the people. Yet, they fail to understand that we are the government of the people, by the people, for the people, who will build resilience to fight the wrong that needs resistance, for the cause that needs assistance, for our future in the distance. Mr. Speaker, it is for that cause and for that future distance that in building a new Saint Lucia, we have demonstrated our resilience in warding off looming social and economic dangers to our country. Of major significance, Mr. Speaker, according to the Economic and Social Review for 2017, unemployment figures dropped from 21.3% of the labor force in 2016 to 20.2% in 2017. Mr. Speaker, while one can argue about the financial health of the country in terms of its various balances, there is no doubt that there has been economic improvements in the macroeconomics of this country. What this is saying, Mr. Speaker, is that there is renewed confidence in the management of the country. It is this confidence that will be carried forward as we continue to take this country to a higher level of economic and social prosperity. Mr. Speaker, ever since the budget address and the approval of the Appropriation Act 2017-2018, the members opposite, microscope in hand, have been searching at the fiscal numbers to see deterioration of our fiscal situation and the eventual downfall of this government. But, Mr. Speaker, no. Mr. Speaker, my assessment upon review of last fiscal year, there's probably no need to boast or brag about outstanding performances, but certainly I can say to this honorable House and to the people of Saint Lucia is that bagay pa pli mauvais. Mr. Speaker, we are on a road to recovery. We are experiencing growth. The unemployment situation has improved, and there's a gradual return of confidence among investors. Notwithstanding, Mr. Speaker, all their talk, even members opposite realize the improvement and are so desperate to get back into office, they are now having dreams of brighter days. But, Mr. Speaker, dreams of brighter days will remain mere dreams if they aren't prepared to participate in building resilience today to secure our future. So they have said not to take comfort with the numbers of the current performance of the economy. But while we do appreciate the advice, however, Mr. Speaker, let me assure the people of this country that we are mindful of the need to be prudent. However, we are in office to bring about positive results and increase opportunities. Now, Mr. Speaker, having glossed over two of the economic indicators as reflected in the Economic and Social Review, let me now address the medium-term vision plan as far as infrastructure is concerned. Simultaneously, I shall attempt to link the plan, policies, and programs and the impact on the people of the country. Mr. Speaker, it is said that no organization or institution or agency can survive without a strategy or a plan. The Ministry of Infrastructure is no exception. We are cognizant of the significance of the public infrastructure to national, social, and economic development in Saint Lucia, and the extent to which it has been severely challenged over the years. Mr. Speaker, public infrastructure has suffered from dwindling budgetary allocations and, more recently, severe weather events due to climate change. Transport infrastructure, roads, bridges, culverts, crossings, and even rivers and watercourses faced the wrath of Hurricane Thomas in 2010 and the Christmas Eve trough in 2013. Mr. Speaker, the ravage of Hurricanes Irma and Maria on our neighbors remain etched in our minds. God forbids that one of these days we are visited by an unfriendly visitor. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we pray for the best, we work for the best, and we prepare for the best. Mr. Speaker, this is why, in our vision, planning and programming, we as a responsible government are building resilience in our public infrastructure, including schools and public buildings. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Infrastructure, in its medium-term vision for road infrastructure, intends to maintain the primary road network, the Castries-Grosley Highway, right through the west and east coast and back to Castries, at the highest motorable and acceptable international roughness index. Mr. Speaker, the intention is to ensure that over time all of our roads will be free of potholes, and that certainly will result in the reduction in vehicular operating costs. Consequently, in the north of the island, from Corinth through to Dayglow, The bypass roads, among others, will be upgraded. And that program, Mr. Speaker, has started, and the evidence is all over for those who can see to see. And if they are blind, I'm sure they are feeling. The objective is to reduce, in the short term, the traffic congestion and conflicts along the Castries-Grosley Highway and within the city. Now, I know, Mr. Speaker, yesterday, a particular member raised the issue of the Castries-Grosley Highway, and as I proceed with my presentation, I will deal with this situation. In tandem with these initiatives and some soft measures along the Castries-Grosley Highway, it is the intention to reduce the traffic situation, and we will conduct an integrated traffic study to inform our course of action and inform our medium to long-term plan. One issue which was raised, Mr. Speaker, during the rebuttal yesterday, and I believe it was the parliamentary representative for Castries South, was that of the North-South Link Road. Mr. Speaker, in his rebuttal or in his presentation, he questioned the validity of utilizing the UK CIF loan, or rather grant, as opposed to utilizing it on the North-South Link Road from Grosley to Dennery. Mr. Speaker, let me just give you an indication of some of what will at least highlight, or enlighten rather, members on the magnitude of the road to be done from the north to the south, known as the North-South Link Road. Mr. Speaker, that project was a project visioned by the government of the United Workers' Party during the period 2006-2011. It was part of, Mr. Speaker, the vision plan for the development of the country, which was termed the Quadrant Plan, for which in this Honourable House, members opposite more or less ridiculed the idea of having a quadrant plan for the social and economic development. Of course, Mr. Speaker, we lost the election, but the then government, the former administration, continued to explore the possibility of developing the road, and several consultants were engaged to come up with proposals for the development of the North-South Link Road between Grosley and Dennery. A company by the name of Stantec Consulting International Limited completed the North-South Link Road feasibility study on behalf of the Department of Infrastructure, Ports and Energy, and made a number of recommendations which I shall simply gloss through. In this, Mr. Speaker, there were a number of recommendations in terms of the direction of the proposed roads. And in there, it was recommended that they would have there are two options. Option one, which would be establishing a road west of Dennery, that is in Lakai, to north of Debara, the length being 11.15 kilometers. Then the second part is the north of Badeni to Grosley. Third part, north of Debara to Jiwa. And the fourth is Jiwa to Shock roundabout. The total length of this option, Mr. Speaker, is 32.16 kilometers. The second option, Mr. Speaker, comprises four links. Dennery to Forestier, 9.76, Forestier to Castries, 3.04, Forestier to Jiwa, 3 kilometers, and Jiwa to Shock roundabout, 4.14 kilometers, a total of 19.94 kilometers. Mr. Speaker, the cost of constructing that road, looking at the two options, option one, which was the preferred option, The proposed estimate on that option, Mr. Speaker, is $622,045,000 US dollars. $622,045,000. The second option is $415,112,000. So, Mr. Speaker, the point I'm making is that in no way, there's no way that 30 million pounds from the UK government could have constructed that road. And so, as a responsible government and a prudent government, because the UK funding, which is grant funding, is time sensitive, we were forced to make the best decision, and we decided to repair and reconstruct infrastructure that is already existing, hence the decision to look at the Millennium Highway and the West Coast Road. Mr. Speaker, I will update soon on how we are proceeding, in that the bids are already being prepared, and hopefully later this year we will proceed with and we'll start construction of those segments of road. Mr. Speaker, let me move quickly on to the issue of bridge condition assessments. Mr. Speaker, we have, ever since assuming office, undertaken to do a number of assessments of our bridges throughout the country. We have found out, Mr. Speaker, and identified a number of bridges to be replaced, as well as those that require maintenance. There are 3 bridges earmarked to be replaced very soon, among them being the Wavin-Poisson Bridge and the Cul-de-Sac Bridge, which assistance from the Japanese government through JICA has been secured. The third bridge, Mr. Speaker, the second set of bridge, the third bridge rather, is the construction of a new bridge at PI. And yesterday, I believe, a member raised the issue of PI, and that bridge to replace the current Bailey Bridge, which was constructed as a temporary bridge crossing in the aftermath of the 2013 Christmas Eve trough. A permanent bridge and better bridge will be constructed, and it's expected to improve the traffic maneuverability in the area. Funding for reconstruction will be provided by the World Bank under the Disaster Vulnerability Reduction Project. Mr. Speaker, general conditions of bridges in Saint Lucia. It is a serious matter, Mr. Speaker, because oftentimes we have encountered and experienced situations in Saint Lucia whereby bridges just suddenly collapse. And the most recent one, if I recall, was the culvert crossing at Rodney Bay, which collapsed a few years ago, and the then government had to quickly find resources to rebuild those. We have found out, Mr. Speaker, in our condition assessments, that there are a number of bridges which require urgent attention. The Deglo-Mark Bridge, Piat, La Passe, Wavin 212, the Bacadère and Il Pirata bridges. All of those, among others, need the attention of the ministry, and we shall proceed to provide the necessary attention. With the impact of major storm events such as Debbie, Iris, Thomas, and Christmas Eve trough and Matthew, a number of bridges have been negatively impacted in some way or the other, highlighting the need for immediate attention of those bridges. Mr. Speaker, it is indeed a situation which must be taken into consideration, as there's a cost to road users when our infrastructure is not up to standard. It significantly reduces the likelihood of bridge failure, especially during a major storm event, and to reduce economic losses as a result of road closures. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, the targets set for our bridge program are: 1, reconstruct 6 bridges by year 4, refurbish and maintain 32 bridges by year 4, reduce flooding in the cul-de-sac basin by 80% by year 4, reduce the number of bridges in our inventory with a remaining life of less than 5 years, and institute a comprehensive program of periodic inspections and routine maintenance of bridges, culverts, and pedestrian passes to identify any risk by year 2. The intention, Mr. Speaker, is to ensure that at all times our infrastructure, bridges, roads, etc., are kept in a very, very pristine and motorable condition. Mr. Speaker, I want to quickly spend 2 minutes on legislative authority. Mr. Speaker, the damage to our road infrastructure is not only as a result of a reactive or poorly structured or designed maintenance regime. The damage of our roads are caused by ingress of water from poorly designed driveways with no grills, tracking of heavy equipment such as excavators on our roads, construction waste spilled from cement trucks and heavy lorries. Mr. Speaker, the public is fed up. We have attempted to enforce the laws, but we are forced with a very archaic piece of legislation, the Works and Roads Act, which has little or no teeth remaining. To this end, Mr. Speaker, it is our intention this year to review this outdated piece of legislation to allow the Ministry of Infrastructure to enforce and penalize the perpetrators. Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious issue. Not too long ago, we were called, or we had reason rather, to address a situation on the Monjaro Hill for years where the disposal or the spillover of cement, concrete from those concrete trucks affected the rideability on that portion of road. It cost us some money, but I believe, Mr. Speaker, the legislation must be dealt with to penalize, whether by new taxes, which I'm sure the gentleman on the other side will support, so as those persons who are investing in concrete trucks will be called upon to pay a levy for the potential spillage and waste likely to be deposited on our roads, interfering with the infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, also, the legislation must be revised to examine some of the penalties, some of which are just $20 and $50, which makes absolutely no sense. Mr. Speaker, our road infrastructure comprises approximately 700 kilometers of paved roads, 55 kilometers of primary roads, 122 of secondary roads, and 423 tertiary roads. Mr. Speaker, the current condition of our roads is one that we must have concern for. And to ensure that we provide and meet our objectives of having high-quality roads, we are introducing within the Ministry of Infrastructure an international measurement of road quality that will instruct the ministry as to the interventions necessary and the preventative maintenance program that should be executed. That program, Mr. Speaker, I will speak about as I move further and explain the road maintenance management system that has been introduced in the Ministry of Infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, road users complain of potholes, blocked ditches, and other conditions of our roads. In the Ministry of Infrastructure, we have developed the policy of responding to potholes and to eliminate potholes in 7 days. But I have said that cannot be our charter. Our charter must be to prevent potholes from emerging by constantly monitoring the road surface and making timely interventions to prevent potholes from developing, because signs certainly appear way before those potholes qualify as being a pothole. Mr. Speaker, please permit me to repeat in this honorable House that the Minister for Finance, in his wisdom, has approved 79% of $14 million to my ministry for roads maintenance. This is the second year in which we have been provided with this allocation, and we pledged to the people of Saint Lucia that we will deliver your roads to you, that we intend to drastically improve on the rideability of the roads. Mr. Speaker, one member yesterday indicated that there was 0, 0, 0, 0, almost like a salary increase that never came, under the capital program. But, Mr. Speaker, what really he was looking at was the capital expenditure. Later on, I'll explain to you the location of the expenditure under the recurrent expenditure, which will take care of the routine activities of the ministry on the recon and rehab. Mr. Speaker, our goal is to significantly reduce the level of deterioration of the road network and to cut back the area of potholes and, of course, improve the surface of our roads. Mr. Speaker, let me move on to the road maintenance management system. Our commitment over the last 2 years, is to maintain an excellent road surface. Therefore, we were able to, in negotiations with the Prime Minister, to get his approval to agree to invite tenders to engage them with the necessary competence to assist in addressing the needs through a road maintenance management system. A road asset management system is a collection of software tools that help the road. So we have been able, Mr. Speaker, to engage a company who won the tender by the name of Survey of Finland, who are in Saint Lucia now, working with the staff of the road maintenance units within the department, and I'm sure some of you may have seen a number of vehicles written road surveys, road maintenance, properly marked, properly wrapped, to give an indication that we are active on those roads. We will be there morning, noon, and night with our beacons, inspecting the roads, having a true assessment of the roads, and giving an instruction to those who must repair it, so that over time we will see a tremendous improvement in our road infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, I'm confident that this will not be a show. I am confident that with the support of the Minister for Finance, who have already demonstrated it last year, and who in this year's budget has indicated his commitment to provide the necessary resources, will be able to underpin the program of road inspection and maintenance, and to be able to improve the international roughness index of that road. The objective of the consultancy, Mr. Speaker, is to provide a sustainable source of relevant and valid information that will instruct us on road maintenance, to enhance the programming and budgeting of periodic maintenance and rehabilitation, and to reduce economic challenges posed by natural disasters and climate change. Mr. Speaker, the Castries-Grosley Highway. Mr. Speaker, the most recent population census conducted in St. Lucia in 2010 indicated that just over 15% of the population resided in the Northern District. The last administration, Mr. Speaker, considering the last population census of 2010, said just over 15% of the population, 15, resided in the Northern District. Mr. Speaker, as a consequence of the increase in population, with new housing, etc., the traffic situation is worsening daily. The last government, in its wisdom, attempted to extend the original plan for the highway, which ended at the Shock roundabout, and decided to proceed with a four-lane highway to Grosley. At that time, Mr. Speaker, they were working on statistics provided in 2007 in as volumes. Upon our entry into office and examining the program of the last administration, we felt that it was necessary to do a more holistic, long-term solution for the Castries-Grosley Highway. As a consequence, we decided that one of the first measures we should undertake is to consider the bypass roads, improve them, while we renegotiate with the Kuwait Fund to consider in the not-too-distant future the expansion of the Castries-Grosley Highway. Mr. Speaker, what this will do, it's one, to create better, wider, comfortable, more attractive bypass roads or back roads to remove the traffic off the main Castries-Gosley Highway, to give motorists alternative routes to get beyond Castries and bypass Castries, and to release the traffic on the Castries-Gosley Highway that will, in essence, comfort and temper the volume of traffic moving north and south. Mr. Speaker, that program has already started. And for those of you who traverse the roads and venture out beyond the Castries-Gosley Highway, you'll notice that a number of roads in the north, Laritret, Vieux-Sequi, in a number of those areas, Armandale, Union, where we have made intervention, and I must admit that motorists have responded by using those roads and, to a certain extent, abusing them. Mr. Speaker, we will continue. Mr. Speaker, let me look at the major projects for 2018-2019, bridges and culverts. Plans, as I indicated, are in place for the reconstruction of the Wavin-Poisson Bridge and the Cul-de-sac Bridge to be funded by Japanese government through its agency, JICA. Funding approval in the estimates, $3 million to cover land acquisition and the construction of a bypass road and crossing at Wavin-Poisson is allocated from the government of Saint Lucia and approximately $11 million from JICA. Mr. Speaker, in the first quarter of this fiscal year, we will be officially opening the CDB-funded Tomaso Bridge and the Canaries Bridge. The JICA bridges, Mr. Speaker, are in an advanced stage, and as a consequence of the readiness and our ability to have responded to the Japanese government has written us, in fact, that is the Japanese government, the chief consultant rather, has written to the government of St. Lucia inviting 2 representatives from the Department of Infrastructure and Labor to the financial bid opening, contract negotiation, and contract signing in Japan from the 18th to the 27th of May. So from the 18th to the 27th of May, 2 representatives, one being the permanent secretary, will go to Japan to witness the transparency, the opening of the bid and negotiation for the commencement of work in cul-de-sac and in Wavin-Poisson. The Canaries Bridge, Mr. Speaker, and the Tomaso Bridge were 2 bridges as a consequence of Thomas, which certainly needed attention. The last administration continued with the process, and upon returning to government, Mr. Speaker, we expeditiously proceeded with the Caribbean Development Bank to ensure the funding was secured. So while some are saying we are stopping projects here and stopping projects there, Mr. Speaker, it is not a matter of simply stopping. It's a matter of contemplating what is prudent, what makes sense, and what will create the impact that is necessary without affecting the fiscal situation of this government. Mr. Speaker, we are not reckless. We are one who contemplates and one who takes sound, though bold, decisions in the interest of the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, that Canaries Bridge, Mr. Speaker, built at a cost of $5.857 million, will be completed in April of this year and soon after opened. The Tomaso Bridge, Mr. Speaker, which has lagged behind, which has lagged behind to a great extent, Mr. Speaker, the date has been extended and a revised completion date is May of this year. Other funded projects, Mr. Speaker, in the budget presentation I should run through quickly include recurrent expenditure program, operating and maintenance, $14 million. And it's in the budget for those who can't see. It's in there, Mr. Speaker, and it's on page 2 those who can't see. I know they can read, but some can't see. It's in the estimates, Mr. Speaker, on page 205, $14 million for recurrent expenditure, and it's broken down into operating and maintenance, $9.3 million, supplies and maintenance, $5.04 million. And to explain this, Mr. Speaker, supplies and maintenance includes procurement of asphalt, procurement of road construction material, procurement of other supplies to be able to undertake those works. Operating and maintenance services, Mr. Speaker, includes subcontracting and other works awarded to persons, to contractors to undertake those works. And you have hire of equipment and transport, $1.6 million, Mr. Speaker, making it a total of $14 million to be spent on the maintenance of our road infrastructure.
You were looking for the loans.
Mr. Speaker, yes, they were looking for the loans. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the Minister for Finance will bring clarity to the loans. Mr. Speaker, we have put together a practical budget, a budget that reflects our means and our abilities to finance within the environment of our earnings. However, with our ambition, we have been able to negotiate with the Taiwanese, who have said to us that they are prepared to provide, and they have approved in principle, a loan of $150 million US to Saint Lucia. 100 of that, Mr. Speaker, is a loan to SLASPA. So we cannot reflect SLASPA's loan in the estimates. When the time comes, the SLASPA legislation is quite clear as to how they proceed in as far as they procure services and procure funding. The $50 million, Mr. Speaker, that $50 million will be acquired on the same terms and conditions that they designed, that they engineered through the finance, or rather, through the design finance concept. We cannot reflect it in the estimates, Mr. Speaker, unless negotiations are settled, signed, and prepared to be delivered. And the former Prime Minister, who is on the other side, I'm sure, will recall, in 1997-98, when they introduced BOLT, build, own, what's it? Build, operate, lease, and transfer. I attacked it once. I attacked it, but, Mr. Speaker, it's a good idea. At that time in 1997, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the estimates in 1997-1998, there's no reflection of that bolt until it was activated upon completion. Until. So, Mr. Speaker, it is a similar concept. But you see, Mr. Speaker, in the current economic environment that we all are in, everybody, governments, institutions, organizations are finding ways of financing infrastructure and financing services without following the traditional pathways for which international institutions also try to interfere and to stifle development and productivity. Mr. Speaker, I know time is running, but let me quickly move on to a few other areas, because I also have to deal with the Department of Labor. I have how many? Half an hour? Oh, you were giving me half an hour. So, Mr. Speaker, let me move on quickly to deal with some other areas. Mr. Speaker, no, I didn't attack you, you know. I thought I heard you. But, Mr. Speaker, let me move on and deal with some other areas. Road safety, Mr. Speaker, is one program which may, to some people, have no significance. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm very concerned about what has happened, the carnage that is taking place on our roads. And so, Mr. Speaker, if you look this year, throughout the country, you will see an increase in the number of road signs, traffic signs, and soon you will see directional signs.
Remember, you have 15 minutes.
15 minutes.
Thank you very much. Directional signs. Yes, he has to warm up to come. Put his boxing gloves to deal with red. So, Mr. Speaker, you will see those road signs. We are introducing programs, Mr. Speaker, that will address the issue of hotspots where accidents constantly happen. Mr. Speaker, one place I can tell you is the Shock Hill, which has a reputation of accidents and the claiming of death, of the claiming of lives. A number of people have been paralyzed, Mr. Speaker, on that Shock Hill. We, as a ministry responsible for road safety, must investigate and find out what the problem is. The problem may be about the geometrics of the road. It may be they're driving too fast. And if they're driving too fast, then we must put tempering measures, Mr. Speaker, to slow down the traffic and to ensure that we save lives rather than to accelerate speed on our roads. So we'll deal with it, Mr. Speaker. We'll put in place road safety management, safe roads and mobility, safer vehicles is one other area, safe road users, and post-crash responses. Mr. Speaker, also you will see in the coming weeks the implementation of crash barriers throughout the island in a number of locations in Saint Lucia, along the West Coast Road, along the East Coast Road, along the Castries Harbour. A number of persons have lost their lives as a consequence of our neglect in providing those crash barriers and rails to protect them. Quickly, Mr. Speaker, I want to deal with the question of port services. A lot has been said about the redevelopment of the Hironoya International Airport, and I have spoken about it before. And I have said different governments, different regimes, different administrations deal with certain initiatives differently. We were in government. We were at the point of takeoff, like the member for Labrie, Republic of Labrie would say. We're at the point of takeoff. We introduced the tax or levy. We were negotiating the implementation of the project. The last administration came, they said, no, let us go the other way with the World Bank, the IFC, and attempt to get the work done. Okay? Well, they stopped the tax. But they used some to do works on the airport. So they went in that direction, Mr. Speaker. We returned, and the policy of the government was that we rather go the other way and take full responsibility and management of the development and management of the airport. Mr. Speaker, negotiations are in an advanced stage, and hopefully we are moving on and to commence construction for the latest September 2018. Mr. Speaker, the question of our cargo ports, we have seen an increase in traffic in Port Castries. We have seen an increase in traffic, particularly at this time during the cruise ship season, sometimes with 6, 7, and 8 tourist ships in Port Castries, 2 anchored outside, 6 on the inner port. And with the expansion of Point Seraphine, the time has come for us to consider establishing a new commercial port. We are exploring now, Mr. Speaker, and conducting feasibilities on the potential of looking at cul-de-sac for the establishment of a new port, the details of which will be communicated to this Honourable House sooner than later. Mr. Speaker, it was my intention to deal with energy, but my colleague minister who shared the energy portfolio with me has said much about energy, and I'll reserve this later, Mr. Speaker, for a formal statement in the House on energy. That is important, Mr. Speaker, because much is being said about the government lack of interest and lack of passion for energy. Mr. Speaker, we are passionate, determined, and committed to meet our commitment and to introduce all of the initiatives previously established, previously initiated, to bring Saint Lucia to its rightful place of development. And so, Mr. Speaker, very soon we'll be introducing to the Cabinet what is known as the National Energy Transition System Strategy. Then the geothermal energy, Mr. Speaker, has taken off earnestly. Public consultations are taking place, and we are hoping that once we have completed the public consultations, we will begin the exploratory drillings to determine the content and the volume and the capacity of the energy from the geothermal. Wind development, Mr. Speaker, a lot has been said. A lot has been said about the great work that the former administration has done, and we have squandered the opportunity. As my colleague said, the market is open. It is open to allow anyone who may wish to participate to participate. At the end of the day, the government is committed to fulfilling its energy needs. Wind, Mr. Speaker, we have been in conversation and negotiations with the private developer, and not too recently he was here in Saint Lucia, during which we had a conversation and we arrived at certain conclusions for which a memo is going to Cabinet for final determination to do with the acquisition of lands for the wind farm in the east of the country. The street lighting program, Mr. Speaker, yet another program that we have been accused of abandoning and throwing away and squandering money offered by the CDB. Mr. Speaker, it is one, I didn't say you did, you said it. I said we have been accused. So please don't accept the blame. Mr. Speaker, it was one in which we felt, after analyzing the loan that we've been offered, we felt that it was better to stop FOMOing, seek grant funding. Otherwise, if that's not possible, we'll return and look at the issue of LED lighting. Let me quickly, Mr. Speaker, conclude by looking at the Labour Department. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Department often diminished in stature by those who place slight significance and relevance to its function, role, and services offered in national development, is a critical and powerful department in the governance and in the social and economic development of our nation. The department, Mr. Speaker, in whose hands is placed the well-being of our nation's workforce, has a tremendous responsibility to fill. In this regard, a number of important measures are being put in place to uplift, upgrade, and highlight the Department of Labour. These measures, some of which I will enunciate in a few minutes, are clearly intended to give the Department of Labour greater visibility as it seeks to identify and resolve the problems that are dotted all over the industrial relations landscape in Saint Lucia, and to make its services more accessible to both the workers and the employers who have cause to utilize its services. Mr. Speaker, the structure of the department to deliver on its targets is being delivered through a public relations and industrial services unit, commonly called PRISU, which deals with labor relations. It is responsible for creating awareness among the workforce. I just heard that we fired a PS, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, PSs can be moved from one department to the other, and the gentleman on the other side understands that better than I do.
Exactly.
Occupational health and safety, Mr. Speaker, is yet another area in the Department of Labour that is important. A department that deals with workplace conditions, environment within which our workers work, to ensure that they are safe and that they are healthy. The employment unit, Mr. Speaker, which is a unit within the department traditionally engaged in the recruitment of workers who primarily participates in the seasonal agriculture worker program in Canada, is yet another important unit within the department as it places young persons and adults in jobs in Canada, but also looks at the potential for jobs in Saint Lucia itself and jobs on the international scene. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the work permit unit is a unit which deals with work permits, and it controls employment and processes application. Mr. Speaker, I just want to reflect, to give you some information.
Honourable Member, you have 5 minutes.
Within the next 5 minutes, Mr. Speaker, I have 2 hours of information to deliver. And I do hope you understand and place the elasticity of, of your watch on the 5 minutes. But, Mr. Speaker, moving on.
You see, you buy 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, going back to the question of the employment unit, ever since I assumed the role as Labour Minister, I thought that we shouldn't just sit back and rely on tradition in as far as the placement of our workers in Canada. I decided that every year I shall undertake to visit Canada, to meet with the workers, to get an understanding of their experiences in Canada, to meet with officials of government, and to meet with employers. Mr. Speaker, as a consequence of the 2 visits that I've made to date, here are the results. In 2015, Mr. Speaker, Commonwealth of Dominica had 116 workers earning $1.7 million. Grenada had 45, Montserrat 5, St. Kitts 25, Saint Lucia 231, and St. Vincent, our biggest competitor, 236. That was in 2015. In 2016, Dominica 118 workers, St. Lucia 221, St. Vincent 267, outstretching us in 2016. I make quickly to say that this was as a consequence of a Vincentian heading the unit. But in 2017, Mr. Speaker, Dominica had 130 workers, Grenada 91, St. Lucia moved from 221 to 285, and St. Vincent 296, getting closer to St. Vincent. Our earnings, Mr. Speaker, from the 285 workers from St. Lucia in Canada was a net of $4.702 million for those 285 workers. This year, Mr. Speaker, and last year, Mr. Speaker, that number represents, that increase represents a 25% increase in our numbers. And overall, at the sub-regional level, Mr. Speaker, a 20% increase overall in the numbers in the OECS. Mr. Speaker, this year, we have already passed our numbers of last year at this time. And it is projected that we will increase our numbers beyond 30% this year, taking it to a record high ever since the program was started in 1967. Mr. Speaker, this is the work of a working government. This is the work of a united Workers' Party. Let me just quickly, Mr. Speaker, although there are a number of other issues that I would love to speak on, but I'll use the opportunity in future, Mr. Speaker, to make some statements in the Parliament, to address the Parliament, and to give status reports on what we are doing, department by department, to the Parliament of this country. And so, Mr. Speaker, I will close. I will close by quickly running through a few things in the constituency. I have no slides to show, but I have work to show, and people who are moving can see the work that has been done. But, Mr. Speaker, I must take this opportunity to thank once again all my constituents for their continued support and patience through the years. They have, with the exception of once, returned me to office every time I visited the polls. And on this occasion, well, you too, but you know, our performances are much different. Much different. This time, Mr. Speaker, the people of Castries North returned me with a victory margin of 2,346. If you come, you'll get more than that. If you, oh, the bush doctor, no. Mr. Speaker, but you know, Mr. Speaker, you know, I can give, as I say to my people oftentimes, I can give all the assurance that a lot will be done for them. For unto whom much is given, much is required. And I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Amen. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I promise to many of my constituents in Sunbelt for this year that negotiations are continuing for the development of the Sunbelt Human Resource Development Center and Sports Complex. In Agard, we are now, in Bocage, yes, we are now trying to finalize the land which will serve both East and North Castries. And also, we're looking at the Agard playing field, Mr. Speaker, where we have placed some temporary lights. We will be putting proper floodlights in conjunction with Loosleck to help the young people up there. The lands are there, sir. So we're going to proceed. The HRDC at Chase Gardens, Mr. Speaker, this week work is starting on fencing and some other works. There are a number of other projects, Mr. Speaker, quickly. BZA, Mr. Speaker, for the Children's Recreation Park, Multipurpose Complex, and Resource Center. In Armandale, a children's playground. In Leclerc, work is continuing or has started and continuing on the fencing of the Leclerc playing field. The minister responsible for sports has promised me that the lights at Leclerc will be improved and to provide LED lighting for Leclerc once the mecca of football in Saint Lucia. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I close, I must join others in thanking you for your patience and for your gratitude in stretching the time and giving us the opportunity to make our point and our contribution to this honorable House. I want to thank Mr. Speaker and recognize the work done by my Permanent Secretary in Infrastructure, the DPS Chief Engineer and Engineering team. I must also praise the personnel, my personal assistant and secretary, the staff of the Department of Labor, and as the member for Castries East indicated, we are in a transition stage where one permanent secretary is leaving and another one is coming full of energy to undertake the work of that department. To my constituency team and constituents, my family, particularly my wife, I say thank you for your support through the years. And certainly, without the Almighty God, I praise and thank Him for life, health, and strength. To you, Mr. Speaker, with great confidence, with support and strength, I support the Revenue and Expenditure, rather the Appropriation Bill 2018-2019. I thank you.